Ah, Italy. A country famous for its cultural marvels, its culinary delights, and its high-level international weightlifters. Wait, what? Ma certo! The Italian team has added a slate of world and Olympic medals to its trophy case. Back in 2012, the Italian team sent exactly one athlete to the Olympics. Less than a decade later, at the 2020 Games, held in 2021, the Italian team sent 5 athletes and secured 3 Olympic medals, 1 silver and 2 bronze. How the heck did a country that's gone through nearly 70 governments since World War II, seriously, make such a sudden and successful transformation? I was wondering the same thing. So I went to the source, the Italian National Team Training Center in Rome, to watch the athletes, chat with the coach, and see what I could learn. I've narrowed it down to a few key points, as well as one myth about the team that I think ties everything together. So sit down, grab a bowl of cacio e pepe or a cannoli, and get ready to learn some weightlifting Italian style. In case you're wondering, yes, this is a squat rack and a weight tree in my living room, and there's a bench over there that's out of frame. Once you get used to this sort of setup at home, it's really hard to get rid of it. Also note the old hook grip socks to protect the barbell. Okay, so one thing I want to mention is that the Italian team's training schedule looks a lot like most other countries' schedules. They train a lot. They train most days of the week, often more than once per day. Their very young athletes train even more frequently, but that's probably because the sessions are shorter. Anyway, the point here is we don't need to dwell on their schedule. As far as I've encountered, nobody in the world is using a vastly different approach to reach the highest levels of the sport. Like, there's no one I'm aware of getting by on just 1 or 2 sessions a week. Sorry. So in my chat with Sebastiano, the head coach, it was pretty clear that there was no secret to their training approach.
Perché non è che noi abbiamo scoperto adesso chissà che cosa, noi lavoriamo tutti i giorni per cercare di migliorare tutti i giorni e tutti i giorni ci rendiamo conto che qualcosa va cambiato e qualcosa va aggiunto e qualcosa anche va tolto.
Just in case you missed it, let's hear that again.
Perché non è che noi abbiamo scoperto adesso chissà che cosa.
The secret, such that there is one, is consistent training.
Noi lavoriamo tutti i giorni per cercare di migliorare tutti i giorni.
Yes, you want to be mindful of changing things and learning as needed, but never lose sight of the basics, showing up and putting in the work. We have a pretty good idea of what works for strength training, for example, for which you can see our video devoted entirely to that topic. So your efforts are better spent absorbing and utilizing those basic principles than chasing after some mythical holy grail of training. Second, while consistency is key and there are no secrets, it is important to be open to new approaches, as long as they work and are backed by evidence in research or practice or both. Consider that for a long time, certainly during my days in the sport, ages ago, there was a pretty consistent belief that athletes needed a dramatic decrease in volume and intensity leading up to a competition. Quick refresher in case these terms are new to you. When we say volume, we're talking about the amount of work being done. So high volume would be lots of sets and reps, for example. When we say intensity, we're talking about proximity to maximal effort lifts. So high intensity would mean lifts that are like 85 or 90% or more. The older approach meant athletes might be doing very few sets with only 50, 60, or maybe 70% in the days prior to a meet. Lots of coaches have challenged this approach more recently, so maybe it's not as widespread as it once was, but Sebastiano summed up his views nicely.
Tu considera che quando noi comunque in allenamento facciamo delle prestazioni bellissime, non le facciamo mai perché abbiamo scaricato, le facciamo sempre carichi di lavoro.
Sì.
Quando tu scarichi moltissimo il lavoro per andare a fare la miglior prestazione, pensi sì, comunque ne hai determinato una differenza di quello che è l'abitudine a gestire il carico. Pur trovandolo più sciolto, più forte, che non sono molto d'accordo io in questa cosa che viene ripetutamente ribadita, trovi degli automatismi che sono alterati rispetto alla consuetudine.
Here's some lifting of the Italian team from the 2023 World's Training Hall. Sergio Massidda with a casual 110 kilo snatch, which is just over 80% of what he snatched a few days later in competition. And then he does a 150 kilo clean and jerk, which is about 90% of his competition lift. Then there's Lucrezia Magistris with a 90 kilo snatch, around 95% of what she did a few days later. Giulia Miserendino is here hitting a 100 kilo snatch, again over 90% of what she'll do on the platform just a few days later. And then she goes to 105, which is very nearly her opening weight, which was 107. In a clean and jerk, it was similar for her. This 120 kilo lift is just 2 kilos shy of what she opened with in competition. Now, before you go hitting max effort singles a day or two before your next meet, remember, these are professional athletes and they're working within their normal range of intensity. The biggest change comes in the volume reduction very close to the competition.
Gli allenamenti ad alto volume non hanno un'intensità bassissima, hanno sempre un'intensità molto alta. E comunque sia in una parte del volume viene tenuta a una certa percentuale, ma poi l'intensità anche con quei volumi andiamo a toccarla. Rimaniamo poco in quell'intensità alta, ma ci arriviamo sempre però. Però poi la differenza tra i 2 giorni prima della gara e i 10 giorni prima della gara generalmente varia veramente di poca percentuale, parliamo del 3-5%, non è che cambi di così tanto e il volume cambia solamente negli ultimi 4 giorni.
Again, they're doing what they're accustomed to. And this is going to vary, and maybe vary dramatically from athlete to athlete, which brings me to the third point. People respond very differently to training programs.
E quindi bisogna capirne esattamente la sopportazione, a che cosa sta la sopportazione di quel tipo di lavoro. Non può essere un lavoro imposto a tutti nella stessa maniera per un'infinità di cose, per età, per genere, per peso corporeo, per mobilità articolare, per elasticità muscolare.
And just as important, individuals can respond very differently to the same training as they change and develop as lifters. Consider this point.
Cioè, io ho questo esercizio tecnico, riesco a sviluppare questo movimento, risparmio tanta energia e quindi risparmio anche durante tutta la programmazione, quell'energia che risparmio la trasformo in lavoro che non ho buttato giù andando a recuperare i bilancieri da una parte all'altra in maniera goffa, dove sprechi il triplo dell'energia rispetto invece a chi lo fa in un certo modo.
The snatch and clean and jerk are highly technical, challenging movements. When you're starting out, and even when you're an intermediate lifter, there's a good chance you're doing things in a way that wastes a lot of energy. This might be the case even if you're lifting close to your theoretical maxes based on your raw strength numbers. But that doesn't mean all that effort comes without a price. In Sebastiano's view, improving your technical abilities in the lifts in such a way that you're not beating yourself up on attempts can mean the ability to do more work elsewhere in the workout. Conversely, if your lifts are physically taxing due to your technical limitations, then it might impact work capacity in other areas. But, and here is the fourth takeaway, all this is dependent on controlling factors outside of the gym.
E il recupero viene legato esattamente a quelli che sono anche i fattori esterni alla palestra. Molte volte il recupero, l'allenamento viene distratto esattamente da queste cose qui e viene attribuito al troppo lavoro o al poco lavoro, ma non è così.
This is important. Not that the other things weren't important, but I think this is really key. Everybody loves talking about training programs. What works, what doesn't work, what can you do to get an edge, what secret will add kilos to your lifts, what special warm-up routine or shoe or app will finally make the difference. This is what gets people to click on things and convinces them to hand over fistfuls of money chasing after PRs. To be certain, training matters, but time outside the gym matters just as much. If your life is an absolute disaster zone of poor sleep, bad nutrition, and weekend benders, nothing you can do in the gym will make up for it, nor will any special recovery hacks. I realize that for some people these things are a luxury. If you're a caregiver or strapped for cash, things like sleep and diet might be out of your control. But if you can control these things, and many of us can, they are by far the most anabolic things you can do. At least it won't get you popped by WADA. So those are the main takeaways. And like I said, there really aren't any secrets. If you've been following the sport or this channel for a while, you probably already know that this is pretty much the case. But what about that myth I mentioned earlier? Well, while working on this video, I had to dig through Italy's results at various competitions over the years. I first went to the World Championships in 2010, and while they had a few athletes, nobody was paying much attention to them. That's very different from today. As I mentioned, their athletes have medaled at Worlds and the most recent Olympics, and they're putting up serious weights. But the idea that this happened out of nowhere is just totally false. I'm guessing it's more a product of not seeing Italian lifters on social media all that often before a few years ago. Yes, they may have only had one athlete at the 2012 Olympics, but they spent the next decade slowly and steadily building up their team. One of their medalists at the 2020 Games was Giorgia Bordignon in the 64 kilo class. She'd been lifting and medaling in international meets for years by that point, including at the 2016 Games, where she placed 6th in a stacked class that had lifters from China, DPRK, Kazakhstan, and Colombia. Her 2020 Olympic medal wasn't a sudden breakout. It was the result of years and years of work. And that's basically what the Italian team has been doing ever since my first Worlds in 2010. In short, they put in the work and they focused on what they needed to do to succeed rather than copying someone else or chasing short-term fixes. And it's not like it was a straight line. Progress is almost never perfectly linear. There have been and will be stumbles and meanderings along the way. This is inevitable. This is super relevant for athletes who are in the intermediate stage, which is probably the vast majority of athletes. To paraphrase from a source that I've forgotten, people tend to overestimate the changes they can make in a few months or a year, but underestimate how much they can change over 5 or 10 years. So forget about quick fixes and overnight success. Focus on the basics, learn and make changes when appropriate, and put in the work. Think about what you'll do in 5 years rather than 5 weeks. And don't forget the cannoli.
Take the cannoli.
That's it. We hope you enjoyed this little exploration of things I took away from my chat with Sebastiano and my visit to the Italian team. I want to take a second to express huge thanks to the Italian team. They were super generous and accommodating in hosting me during their session. So big thanks to them for their generosity and hospitality, both the athletes and the coaches. And thanks to our patrons as well. You all make this work and trips like this possible. If you want to see more like this, let us know and consider becoming a supporter. Otherwise, consider hitting the like and subscribe button, which will help other people find this video. As always, thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.